Welcome to Last Show of the Week on Friday, the 12th of February 2021. My name's Toby Lepati Mesme, and this is MesmePolitics, bringing you all the latest. Over the next half hour, all the latest in UK and US politics from a unique leftist perspective, right here. Coming up later, Ian Murray, Priti Patel, Keir Starmer, they're all bad for variety of reasons, we discuss. Also, impeachment and the need for a New Deal level rescue package for the US economy from the Biden administration. But now, at the top of the hour, in a minute, we will be talking about the dire polling for the Labour Party. The vaccine bounce is very much well and truly in swing. But first, to kick us off, I want to talk to you about why I have officially resigned from the Labour Party. I'm no longer a member of the Labour Party. Here is a direct reading from the letter I sent to my CLP chair. I've cancelled my direct debit and I'm resigning as a member of the Labour Party with immediate effect. The last year has seen the party that inspired me and millions of others to come into politics abandon me and my generation. A package of much-needed social democratic reforms has been jeopardised. The leadership has cracked down on dissent, attacked the previous leader, and demonised the left. The young people who were given hope by the last few years of the Labour Party have been patronised and treated like children by much of the Parliamentary Labour Party for wanting policies taken for granted in various other Western nations. I would consider rejoining at some point in my life if the party once again takes up the mantle of socialist principles and radical politics. Until then, I won't be returning and will be joining the Green Party, since now that party reflects my values far more than the current incarnation of the Labour Party. I'm no longer a Labour member. I left because the direction things are going was unconscionable for me. The Labour Party is clearly targeting people unlike me and taking the votes of people like me and my generation entirely for granted. The only action I can take is to vote with my feet. I've joined the Green Party because right now, in my view, the Green Party offers the best vehicle for any form of radical left politics in Britain. The Green Party can act as a leftward pressure group on the Labour Party in the same way UKIP acted as a very effective right-wing pressure group on the Tory Party, and the Green Party can and should cultivate support and cooperation with the Labour left. The Green Party's policy positioning is absolutely where I am politically. Obviously, I go further in some areas. Obviously, I disagree on some areas. It is not perfect. In many ways, the Green Party has embraced too much individualism and a degree of sort of middle-class neoliberal thinking. And it did sort of go into a one-issue FBPE party at one point. There are many questions about whether it's serious enough about matching up to the crises we all face, but the Green Party is far more suited to match up to the crises we all face than the Labour Party. And in my view, it is the party right now that reflects my values. Maybe I will return one day to the Labour Party in the long-term future, the medium-term future, if there is a socialist leadership. I'm sure many others will. But for now, obviously part of the left has to remain in the Labour Party and fight. People are doing that. Comrades are doing that. I have decided my energies are best spent working within the Green Party, and I do it all in good faith. It's not a cynical move. I'm not going to ditch it next week or anything like that. I am now a committed member of the Green Party, and I will work to those ends and to further the goals of the left more broadly in Britain, outside that party and through that vehicle. And hopefully there can be collaboration with the left of the Labour Party. Long-term goals for the Green Party should be to grow, should be to gain seats, and it should be to basically act as a vessel to push Labour to the left. That's what has to be done. As well, obviously, if I was a Green strategist, medium term, you want more seats, maybe even be part of a coalition government. concessions out of a future Labour government, future hypothetical Labour government, but long term, the Greens should be thinking of, we're talking decades and decades, fighting as a vehicle that could challenge Labour for the main seat in government, right? If we're talking under PR, and we're talking, decades in the future, the Greens could form a very stable and vital part of a coalition government, or even be the biggest party in a government. More likely as a component part of a government. Greens ever forming a government in Britain is very unlikely, but that is the strategy, the very long-term goal I would have in mind if I was at Green HQ. Realistically, what they need to be looking at now is growing and eventually being part of a centre-left government and being that voice in that government. That's all I can imagine. And probably trying to do a deal with Labour going into 2024. That would be ideal. Get Labour to stand down in certain areas, and they stand down in other areas. Going over to the latest polling, it is bad. This is from Survation. It's the changes from the last month. Labour are on 33%, the Tories are on 39%. The Greens are on 7%, the SNP are on 5%, the Lib Dems are on 9%. So, an abysmal result for the Labour Party. Pardon me, an abysmal result for the Labour Party. The polling, from Labour's perspective, is absolutely pitiful. Pitiful. 33%. Across England in 2019, Labour amassed 34%. Across the UK in 2019, Labour amassed 32%. We're pretty much in late 2019 territory on 33%. That's not good enough. We've had all these crises. Need I remind you that under the last leader, consistent leads for months on end at one point, and following on from that, a year or more of being level pegging. And that's the best we've had, really. What we've got here, Labour failing. Maybe we'd all let up on criticism of the Labour leadership if they were really firing ahead in the polls. 20 points ahead, we'd go, okay, some priorities can get pursued this way. But no, 33%, a loss of 5 points over the last month. It's dire. The local elections could be really damaging for Labour, really, really damaging. They are clearly treating the left with contempt. The local elections going forward could be really damaging. This is a letter done by Labour MP Caroline Harris, saying, this is from HuffPost, an aide to Keir Starmer has dismissed left-wing criticism of his leadership is nonsense that is not based in the real world. It's Starmer's parliamentary private secretary. She said left-wing critics of Starmer are making themselves look silly. Talking on Zoom, that's all they're doing, talking to each other on Zoom. Come into the real world, my loves, and let's talk about the damage that's been done and the repair work we're doing. When I see these articles, I've actually done it this morning, when I see these articles which say so-and-so is going to be challenging Keir for leader and we need a left-wing candidate, that's the time I think, God, we're getting it right. We must be doing it right because that's what it's all about. You've got to move on, haven't you? We've had that project. It failed abysmally. We're a laughing stock. Let's have no bones about it. Proceeds to cry about Red Wall MPs lost because of the disastrous Starmerite second referendum policy, which verged on political delusion. So Labour are treating the left with contempt. They're so patronising, so insulting to the left, to young people, to minority voters, all these people that were excited and energised by Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, which, by the way, is the only leadership that bucked the trend of decline we've seen since 2005. That's true, that's verifiable. Ridiculous. If Corbyn hadn't been leader in 2017 would have been 2019, right? The only reason 2019 didn't happen sooner, even though it did happen on Corbyn's watch, and we acknowledge that, we acknowledge the failings. 2019 would have happened a lot sooner were it not for Corbyn. 2019 was the inevitable conclusion. Should have happened after 2015. In the end, it happened after 2017. The local elections could be really damaging for Labour. Right now, they're going to hemorrhage the vote because they are treating their core with contempt. Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak talking about the economic shrink of 9.9% in 2020.
Today's figures show that last year our economy experienced a significant shock. And whilst there were some signs of resilience over winter, what's clear is right now many families and businesses are experiencing hardship. That's why we've put in place a comprehensive plan for jobs to support people through this crisis, and we will set out the next stage of our economic response at our budget in early March.
Rishi Sunak continues to fiddle as Rome very much burns. Over to the States, and the Senate trial of Donald Trump has now resumed today, with the former president's defense team taking over. Some of the biggest things you need to know. So it moves to a new phase after 2 days spent with House impeachment managers making a case with at times disturbing video footage and audio recordings of the assault on the Capitol. Trump's lawyers now mount their defence of his conduct, leading up to the violent siege by rioters to overturn the results of the November election. Lead impeachment manager Jamie Raskin yesterday said, "Is there any political leader in this room who believes that if he is ever allowed by the Senate to get back into the Oval Office, Donald Trump would stop inciting violence to get his way? Would you bet the lives of more police officers on that? Would you bet the safety of your family on that?" Representative Joaquin Castro said Trump utterly failed in his duty to preserve, protect and defend. The world watched President Trump tell his big lie. The world watched when he asked his supporters to come here to march to the Capitol. The world is now watching to see whether the rule of law will prevail. Now, very much so regarding local elections. Impeachment. Two very different things. Both car crashes, but two very different things. Republicans, the one benefit of these things, where Trump will be acquitted, is Republicans are going to have to go on the record. This will haunt them, maybe not immediately, but in generations to come. They're going to have to go on the record as the party that legitimised this. And history, in the history books, not good now, but in the history books, will look back on them with contempt. They are, and they talk about being patriots, they are anti-patriots. They are the least, and I don't care if you're patriotic or not, but just looking at this through their own measure of worth, they are the least patriotic people you can ever imagine. There was an attack on the nation's capital. I don't hold it sacred. If you're an American patriot, you do hold it sacred. That attack, surely anyone who calls themselves an quote-unquote an American patriot would be up in arms. No one cares. Throw it under the bus for an orange billionaire. Really? That's patriotism? Really? Ridiculous. At the same time, Joe Biden is talking about his American Rescue Plan.
It's very clear our economy is still in trouble. 15 million Americans are behind in the rental payments. 24 million adults and 12 million children literally don't have enough food to eat. These aren't Democrats or Republicans, they're Americans. I see enormous pain in this country. A lot of folks going hungry, staring at the ceiling tonight wondering, what am I going to do tomorrow? That's why I'm so grateful to the House and the Senate for moving so fast on the American Rescue Plan. Here's what's in that plan. First, it puts $160 billion into our national COVID-19 strategy, which includes more money for manufacturing, distribution, everything that's needed to get the vaccines into people's arms. The American Rescue Plan is going to keep the commitment of $2,000, $600 has already gone out, $1,400 checks to people who need it. This is money directly in people's pockets. It's got money to help us open our schools safely. It's big and it's bold, and it's a real answer to the crisis we're in. The way I see it, the biggest risk is not going too big, it's if we go too small. We can reduce suffering in this country. We can put people back to work. We can gain control of this virus. That's what the American Rescue Plan does.
That's Joe Biden talking about the American Rescue Plan that he's trying to pass in the Congress. Many members of the political liberal establishment and the conservative establishment, that's a given, but also sort of the third way liberal think tanks are pushing back. Scale it down, means test here, trim it here, shrink it down here. Instead of, they are pathologically, irrationally allergic to delivering sweeping wins for the American people. However, Biden's feet are being held to the fire by the progressives in Congress. It's good to see. You love to see it. Here's Jamal Bowman talking about the need for a Black New Deal.
It's time to put our money where our mouth is. And the difference between, FDR implemented a New Deal. In over a 30-year period, $180 billion went to build the white middle class. And only 2% of those funds went to the Black community, which created redlining, which created communities of concentrated poverty, et cetera, right? So now is the time, we often in the progressive movement talk about the Green New Deal, which I support, but what about a Black New Deal? A New Deal that uplifts communities that have been historically marginalized and disenfranchised. There's a reason why the Bronx is the Bronx. And I love the Bronx, no disrespect to the Bronx, but there's a reason why we have housing projects that have been neglected. There's a reason why our schools are underfunded. There's a reason why we have a system of mass incarceration that disproportionately impacts Black and brown people. There's a reason why there's a wealth gap. This is by design. These are policy decisions made by individuals who are either explicitly racist or carried implicit bias. And FDR negotiated with Southern racists for the New Deal, which is why we didn't get a piece of that pie. So the bottom line for us, put your money where your mouth is. You want to talk about racial equity? We can show you outcomes. We can show you data and research. Now we just need the federal government to authorize the spending that's needed, ensure the wealthy contributes what they need to contribute so that we can rebuild the Black community in our beautiful, amazing image.
That's Jamal Bowman there. Very much agree with all of that, of course. When we talk about, and I'm guilty of this as well, when we talk about, the big middle class gains in the 50s and the 60s, a golden age for American capitalism, we don't actually remember often enough, women, minorities, completely shut out, right? It was just white men. It was good for them, and it could be good for everyone. That's why we look back on it and think that's something we could model off in some ways, but vast swathes, majority of the population really, were left behind from it by design. It could have as easily not been, but because of design and because of negotiations and capitulation to Southern racists, it didn't happen. It's just the way it is. A criticism, and that's something that needs to be paid back on, a criticism of Joe Biden that I really have at the moment is the double standards that people hold him by, and he holds other people by. So, around the world, Biden's talking about, corruption, human rights, this, that, and the other. There's no legitimacy in that coming from the US president, particularly someone with the record of Joe Biden, particularly someone that's taken the foreign policy actions Joe Biden has taken. So far, American empire continues. Some welcome change in Saudi Arabia, but other than that, other than the war on Yemen basically being de-escalated because the sugar daddies are withdrawing funds, that's America. We hear all this talk, human rights in China, human rights in Myanmar, human rights in Russia, corruption, interference with elections. It's all hypocrisy, because America is the biggest breacher of human rights. It's the biggest election interferer. It's the biggest aggressor. No credibility. It had criticisms of Russia or China would have credibility coming from someone who had a squeaky clean record, or just a sort of clean record, or a cleaner record than those countries. America doesn't have that. It's a nation founded on white supremacy and genocide. Anyway, at the same time, and of course there's so many things much close. People go, oh, that was 200 years ago. Yeah, I know, I'm making a point. There are numerous monstrosities in this century, right? Since the year 2000, America has gone over. We can spend a whole show going over all that. And the double standards liberals hold Biden to, by basically being like, he's great, we defend him at all costs. Bernie Sanders is the sexist. When actually, a lot of sort of liberal middle-class women, this is sort of the positioning, when Joe Biden has numerous credible accusations of sexual assault levied at him, and we just ignore it. Here is a little clip of the impeachment trial and how it's going.
And we're trained to recognize lack of remorse. But it doesn't take a prosecutor to understand that President Trump was not showing remorse. He was showing defiance. He was telling us that he would do this again, that he could do this again, that he and future presidents can run for national election, lose the election, inflame the supporters for months, and then incite an insurrection, and that would be totally appropriate.
When President Trump incited a lawless mob to attack our process, he was attacking our democracy. He was trying to become king and rule over us against the will of the people and the valid results of the election. For the first time ever in our history, a sitting president actively instigated his supporters to violently disrupt the process that provides for the peaceful transfer of power from one president to the next.
That's why lack of remorse is an important factor in impeachment. Because impeachment, conviction, and disqualification is not just about the past, it's about the future.
Latest numbers showing 56% of Americans think Trump should be convicted and removed from office. But of course, the local Republican constituents don't think that. Therefore, Republican officials will continue to be utter spineless cowards. Absolutely. Now, Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, has described Black Lives Matter protests as dreadful. The protests, in which demonstrations took place in more than 260 towns and cities in June and July, were the largest anti-racism protests in Britain for decades. As part of the demonstrations in the UK, statues of slave traders, including that of Edward Colston in Bristol, were toppled, and a memorial to Sir Winston Churchill in central London had the words, "is a racist," written by the name. Let's have a listen to Priti Patel on LBC. Nick Ferrari, that guy. The go home guy. Have a listen.
Black Lives Matters and, sort of footballers and stars taking this pointless knee. My question is the importance of putting money.
This is the Call the Cabinet feature. So it's like Call Keir. They're calling Priti Patel. Someone's calling Priti Patel about the taking the knee. Maybe it's also a neo-Nazi group, like when they did it with Keir Starmer. Who knows?
Where your knee is, and what your thoughts are about the importance of making sure that we have facilities in place that can become competent role models to help some of these misguided youth.
Do you support taking the knee, Home Secretary?
Well, last summer was quite a moment, actually, with all the protests that we saw taking place. And obviously, I'm going to bring it back. You saw policing as well coming under a great deal of pressure through some of the protests. I don't support protests, and I also did not support the protests that were associated.
You don't support protest?
I didn't support the protest.
Oh, that protest. I thought you said you didn't support protest at all. I know it's a draconian government, but I didn't know I could go to jail for 10 years for protesting. But do go on.
Well, those protests were dreadful, and just
indeed
that on the police in particular.
Right.
But Ben has made a point about supporting role models or encouraging more role models, and we should always do that. Around causes.
But what about taking the knee? You might note, I don't know how much of a sports fanatic you are, you might note that some Scotland rugby players decided they would not. You have some soccer players, football players now saying it's past. Would you still take the knee, Home Secretary?
No, I wouldn't. I would not. I would not have at the time either. There are other ways in which people can express their opinions. Protesting in the way in which people did last summer was not the right way at all. And I also think, we saw statues being brought down, mass dialogue, well, not quite mass dialogue, but some councils making, quite frankly, a stance around statues and street names. There are other ways in which those discussions can take place. And also, quite frankly, I didn't support that attempt to rewrite history. I felt that was wrong.
And you didn't agree with taking the knee per se, at all?
No.
In a rhetorical sense, and in many ways literally, Priti Patel...
What is it to be human?
That's Dame Judi Dench from a Comic Relief advert that's seemingly playing on this computer. Alas, we carry on. Priti Patel is just rhetorically out of the cabinet, out of the government, out of politicians in Britain, the worst of the worst of the worst. Some of the things she says are abhorrent. This was abhorrent. There was a little Freudian slip. Doesn't believe in protest. She is that authoritarian. Then rolls back. They were awful. The racial the contempt you see in Nick Ferrari's little beady eyes, talking about young people protesting for racial justice, and then basically going, it's so wrong. Let's stop rewriting history. The people who rewrite history are the people that laud slave traders. That's rewriting of history. The people that say Winston Churchill had an unblemished historical record. We're not allowed to question it. We're not allowed to study it. It's completely, impenetrable. They're rewriting history. The people who really want to consider living live history are the people who toppled statues, are the people who asked for a dialogue about making history more inclusive of Black Britons, because they're as much a part of history as white Britons. It just so happens we've erased all that multicultural history, and we've basically kept a white supremacist narrative running through our curriculum even to this day. Priti Patel is completely wrong there, but even just the way she says it, it makes your blood boil. This individual controls Home Office policy, she controls asylum policy, immigration policy. Millions of people agree with her. Maybe even a majority of the public agree with her. She's a huge Tory asset, right? She appeals. She'll bring people into the fold that wouldn't usually vote Tory, be it ethnic minority voters in certain communities who have sort of an affinity with the law and order message, or be it white working class voters, the quote unquote, low education grade voters. It's not low education, but that's the CD, whatever you call it, qualification, quantification. So she'll bring those people in. She's a huge political asset for the Tories, stoking the culture war as she is, and it really does show just how do I say this? How much work we have left to do in order to build any sort of decent country here. Keir Starmer will seek to assuage growing criticism of his leadership within Labour by kicking off a major policy blitz next week, as the party aims to paint a picture of what it would do in government. Concerns about Labour's direction were underlined last week by a leaked strategy document that urged the party to focus on a new patriotic approach, including more use of the Union Jack. The document prompted some ridicule from MPs and calls for the Labour leader to flesh out his vision for the party and the country in more detailed policy terms. Starmer is expected to set out some key planks of a future Labour government's economic policies in a speech on Thursday, one of a series of interventions the party hopes will raise the profile of his shadow chancellor, Annalisa Dodds, before the 3rd of March. One Labour source described the strategy as showing a bit of ankle, but said Starmer would begin to transition into the role of a more combative opposition leader as the vaccine programme started to alleviate the immediate public health crisis, saying that means we can start to focus on the bigger picture stuff and talk about systemic change. Angela Smith, Labour's leader in the Lords, said the past year had been about pressing the reset button, saying still waters run deep. My own sense of Keir is that he's very passionate about his politics and what he believes in and what he wants to achieve. He's not someone who's going to shout and holler and be offensive or cry on someone's shoulder, but it runs deep what he believes in. He said we can't go back to business as usual, and he will know his challenge is now to set out what that looks like. But he couldn't do that in an environment where people didn't trust us. You need foundations upon which to build. If you look at great Labour victories, Attlee, Wilson, Blair, they all came at a time when things needed to change. They gave an optimism that things would change, but also the credibility that they were the people to do it. Someone says about Priti Patel, horrible. Is kneeling on someone's neck acceptable? Stupid, insensitive. Agree, obviously. Just despicable. Keir Starmer talking about borders here. Have a listen. It's at Heathrow Airport, like a lemon walking around.
Well, we've been looking around the operation here at Heathrow Airport, and the frontline team are doing an incredible job getting ready for Monday. Our concern isn't their preparations, because they're getting on with that. Our concern is that we now know that there are variants in countries that aren't on the red list. So,
Labour's got a good line on quarantine, toughen it up, fair enough. This all should have been talked about sooner, but good. Labour is in meltdown right now. Keir Starmer's leadership is in free-for-all. They're pushing the reset button. Do you remember how many Tory resets there were when the Tories were melting down over the summer? This is basically that. We'll wait, we'll listen, we'll observe. I'm obviously now not part of the party duopoly. It's very refreshing. I can freely critique both the Tories and Labour from a third-party position. I'm looking forward to it. And of course, if welcome things are proposed, I'll welcome it. We'll all welcome it of the Labour Party. We all want the Labour Party to be doing good things. Let's hope they do. But I'm out. We will be back on Monday. Subscribe, tell your friends, and we will see you 7 PM live right here on Monday. This has been MesmePolitics, and I've been Toby Lapati Mesme. another week ticked off of keeping you up to date every weekday with all the latest for half an hour every evening in UK and US politics from a unique leftist perspective. You can email me, tobyjoshua2004@gmail.com, if you want to get in touch over the weekend. Keep in touch at TobyJoshuaUK on Twitter, and read all the Medium pieces I wrote this week, 5 of them, at TobyJoshuaPolitics on Medium. More on Monday. I'll see you then. Have a lovely weekend.